This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and I'm not even going to bother wearing a funny shirt today because this thing is so huge you wouldn't be seeing it anyway, would you? This is the Razer Blade Pro. Again, we reviewed the Razer Blade Pro with the GTX 1080 GPU inside and 4K display several months ago. Very expensive product, about $3,800. So this is Razer's more affordable version, $2,300, which might seem like, oh my God, a lot of money, but compared to the previous and still available high-end edition, well, that is a lot more affordable, isn't it? What did they cut? Now we have a 1080p display, non-touch, instead of the previous 4K touchscreen, and we have NVIDIA GTX 1060 graphics with the usual 6 gigabytes of GDDR5 VRAM instead of the GTX 1080. So basically what you got here is the brains of the 14-inch Razer Blade in a bigger chassis for around $300 more. If you look at it that way, it seems kind of fair. If you wanted that bigger screen, for example, and if you like the trackpad on the right side, I don't know. Do you? Don't you? Let me know in the comments. I'm left-handed, so it's my version of personal hell to have a trackpad embedded permanently on the right-hand side. There's a couple of other changes, too. No mechanical keyboard. We had a low-travel mechanical keyboard that felt kind of cool on the more expensive one. This is your regular kind of Razer keyboard, a lot like the 14-inch Blades again. We got a hard drive bay now, 2.5-inch hard drive bay. So this configuration, the $2,300 one, has a 256 gig PCIe SSD. Sadly, for the price, though, it's the older Samsung PM951, not the 961 SSD. So it's not quite as fast as the cutting-edge SSDs available today in M2 form factor. And we have a 2 terabyte hard drive. Again, for this price, though, it's 5,400 RPM, not the usual faster 7,200 RPM. Excuse me, right? It's a little bit of a bummer, but okay, you get a lot of premium stuff going on here. You have this really nice looking metal casing everywhere. Very well put together, a lot of ports, Thunderbolt 3, full 4-lane, 40 gigabit per second. So there's a lot of nice stuff here. We're gonna look at it now. So this physical external chassis is the same as the much more expensive model, so that's kind of nice for the price. And it's all the things that we loved about it and all the things we didn't love so much about it. What we do love is the fact that it's very nice looking. It's attractive. It's really well put together. There's no sharp edges anywhere. It looks like a high-end piece of kit. It's metal everywhere. Nice stuff. And a reasonable amount of ports on here, including that Thunderbolt 3. You've got built-in Ethernet. It's killer, just like the Wi-Fi is on here. Reasonable amount of USB ports, your HDMI 2.0 on here. SD card slot, yay. The stuff we love. The stuff we love less is that it's still a fingerprint magnet like crazy. This will look disgusting as this video goes on. It just picks up fingerprint oil like nothing, and I have dry skin. It still look disgusting. And it also shows dust a lot too. So for you OCD types, you tidy folks, keep it clean. You're going to need some rags and a little damp tissue paper every once in a while. The other thing is the love it or hate it keyboard arrangement that we have inside here. You have a decent keyboard. I wouldn't call it a gamer's dream. It's not like a mechanical keyboard with a fantastic feel. It's low travel, but at least it's Chroma RGB backlit. But it's okay as a gaming keyboard. It's okay as a typing keyboard. It's low travel, something you don't usually expect to see in a 17-inch laptop because those tend to be big and thick. And then we have that right-mounted trackpad. Like I said, I leave that up to you. It's a lost cause for me. I'm left-handed. It just doesn't work for me at all. But some of you might like it. I'd be interested to see how many of you do, and I'm sure Razer would actually be curious as to how many of you actually like that versus just tolerate it. One thing that is pretty nice, though, is it lost weight, because you know what? This might be a really thin and sexy looking laptop, but it is big and heavy. It has the footprint of a 17-inch laptop all day, all night. So in terms of the space in your bag, sure, thickness-wise it's going to take up less, but in every other dimension, it's still going to take up a lot of room. And the first Blade, the more expensive 4K one with the GTX 1080, was pretty darn heavy. This one is almost a pound lighter. It's about 6.8 pounds, which is 3.07 kilograms. So it's still a heavy piece. This is not something you casually throw in your backpack and you don't know it's there. But it did lose some weight, which is nice. Now, the bad news is that's in part because they cut the battery capacity. We'll get into that later. The charger is also smaller and lighter too, because they don't need to have the high wattage 250-watt charger that came with the GTX 1080 model. The GTX 1080 requires more power, that's why. So now you have basically the same charger they get with the 14-inch Blade. It's lighter, it's more portable. So overall, at least it is somewhat lighter, easier to move around. CPU is the same inside this, is the same inside the 14-inch blade as well. It's your usual Core i7-7700HQ. That's a quad-core 45-watt CPU that you're going to find in every gaming laptop and mobile workstation these days. There are no 8th generation available yet. That's probably going to come at the beginning of next year, maybe. So 4 cores, good performance, and NVIDIA GTX 1060, like I said, rather than the 1080. It might have been interesting to see what would happen if they had gone with a GTX 1080 Max Q. And I kind of thought they might try that, given the thermal challenges they've been facing with these designs, but they wanted to make it more affordable, and the GTX 1080 Max Q is just as expensive as regular 1080. The 1060 is cheaper, so the price drop there. Thermally, it makes a whole lot more sense than the original and more expensive Razer Blade, which was thermally challenged. We saw lots of throttling, plenty of heat on that thing. The design is simply perhaps too skinny to be having a full 1080 inside and a quad-core 45-watt CPU. This works out fine. We don't see that throttling problem anymore. In fact, it's going to throttle less than the 14-inch blade because it has more room for heat dissipation than a, well, 14-inch chassis. So that's a real good fit there. The GTX 1060 is your entry level of the serious gaming GPUs from NVIDIA, though. So it's good enough for VR, and it's good enough to play AAA titles, but you just might not be playing them at the highest possible settings. You might not be playing them on Ultra, but you can certainly usually play them on medium to high at 1080p resolution. Speaking of that, we have a 1080p display here. It's not touch like the more expensive model. I think that's okay. With a 17-inch display, that was a long reach to get to the touchscreen anyway. It's also a better match in terms of what the GPU can actually deliver in AAA titles today. I mean, 4K is hard even for the GTX 1080 and some of the more demanding games out there, so it's a good match. That said, for you pro apps folks who are buying this for a chic-looking laptop that can do Adobe Premiere and that sort of thing, yeah, GTX 1060 makes sense. There's a limit to the amount of extra oomph you're going to get in Adobe CC products as you move up the GPU chain. It's just not worth spending the money on a GTX 1080 for most people. But you're the folks who probably do want 4K because everybody's using 4K video these days. Look, we are, and high-resolution photos and all that sort of thing. So you're not going to get that high-resolution display option here. The display on this is 120 Hz refresh IPS. You don't see that much with an IPS display because their response times are a lot slower than TN panels. The Asus ROG Zephyrus that we reviewed is one of the few others that actually had a fast refresh IPS panel. The thing is, the response time still isn't that super fast here, but it's nice to have. There is no G-Sync, however, on this model. When it comes to the display metrics, it's a pretty decent panel. It's made by AU Optronics. You can see the part number up on screen for those of you who follow that sort of thing. Again, it's full HD, 1920 by 1080, and the color representation is up there with other premium laptops. It's not a wildly high gamut display by any means. It's just good, solid, almost full sRGB coverage. The gamma is right on, the white point's pretty darn good. So out of the box, it actually had a very good factory calibration. It didn't have to get changed much by our colorimeter to improve things, and the color accuracy is fairly good. So in that respect, nice job there, and that's something that pro apps people would appreciate. In terms of performance, well, this is just like a 14-inch Razer Blade, basically, in terms of performance. You've got the same internals, you've got the same specs. So it's a decent gamer. It's more than decent because the GTX 1060 is pretty darn solid. And like I said, for gaming, it's fine. It's not going to be the most future-proof thing. In this case, the Thunderbolt port might actually be of more interest than it would be on the GTX 1080 model because an external GPU might be just what you need in a couple of years from now when more demanding games come out. The good news is a decent number of games can reach higher than 60 frames per second for refresh rate, but not all of them. So is that partially a lost leader kind of feature? Maybe it is, that 120 Hz refresh rate. Older games, for sure, you can hit that, though. Battlefield 4, yes. Battlefield 1, not so much, unless you drop your quality settings down. I think most people would rather have 60 frames per second at a higher quality than 120 frames per second at a low quality. It has very good speakers built in. Razer usually does a nice job with that, loud and full, and especially given the fact that it's skinny, we appreciate this. A good 2-megapixel webcam, so for those of you people who are doing your Twitch sessions, you'll look sharper. Yeah. Battery, well, the good news is you get the smaller charger, so less to carry around because it doesn't need the bigger charger compared to the more expensive Pro model, but they cut battery capacity, so model. So yeah, at first you think, oh, maybe this is going to be the one that runs a lot longer because much less demanding GPU, no touchscreen, lower resolution, all this stuff. Well, it went from 99 watt hours down to 70 watt hours. So that's a significant drop in capacity. So the net result is it's not going to run that much longer on a charge, if at all, than the more powerful model. And it's really about a 2.5 hour, 3 hour kind of experience, and that's with light to moderate use. And I think people who buy this are probably doing more than light to moderate tasks. One thing that does help with battery life is the fact that this does not have G-Sync, and thus it has switchable graphics, so switches between Intel integrated graphics and the NVIDIA graphics, which is probably why we're seeing that it manages to do 3 hours instead of the more like 2 hours that we got with the GTX 1080 model. To take off the bottom cover, Torx T5 screws are visible all around, but aha, tricky. You'll notice when you look at this rubber bar here, you'll notice there's two little suspicious looking cutouts right there with rubber plugs in them, and that tells you there must be something up. So you got to take those little rubber plugs out. I used a sim puller tool. That has a perfect little point on it. You know, it's just great for digging them out. And you'll find two TD Phillips head screws under here. Gee, thanks for mixing up screw types, just like Dell does. After that, you can lift it right off, and there's our internals. 2 RAM slots, so that's nice. RAM is not soldered on board. Comes with 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM. You can go up to 32 gigs of RAM. New is our hard drive bay right here, and the truncated battery right there. M2 SSD supporting PCIe NVMe SSDs. You can get a 2 terabyte 5400 RPM hard drive in there. You can order it with up to 4 terabytes, or you yourself can go out and get a 2.5-inch SSD if you want and get a whole lot more speed, if that's your thing. I would certainly be tempted to do that. The prices aren't bad. Your Wi-Fi card is killer 1535 right there, and 2 fans, obviously, decent size, not super huge, but given the components in here, we don't need super huge. This is not a super high-end GPU. Now, you can tell you can't see any heat sinks here, those of you who are kind of notebook geeks, and that means you're going to take out the motherboard to actually get to the heat sinks if you want to repaste the CPU and GPU, but we can see from this footprint here they're using a tripod design. I prefer to see 4 corner screws because that makes more even pressure on the CPU and GPU for cooling, but, well, that said, the GTX 1060 is not a super hot card, so it typically runs in the mid-70s when gaming, which is normal. Other than that, you got your stereo speakers, modules right there. Again, like I said, they sound quite good. So how about noise? Because Razer blades are notoriously little vacuum cleaners. Well, like I said, you have the 14-inch Razer blade, but with more space here, so it's not as loud as a 14-inch blade. If you're just doing productivity work, you won't even hear the fans. It's really whisper quiet. When you're gaming, you're going to hear them. It's a little on the high-pitched side, but it's not any more egregious than any other gaming laptop on the market, really, in terms of overall noise volume. And the fan, if you can see the design here, goes whoop, and it exhausts out the rear away from you, so it's not going to heat you up. Now the only air intakes are from this area right here, which is over here, so be sure not to block those because, well, it's going to suffocate and run hot. Otherwise, I'd like to see a bigger air intake area, honestly, but I think they went for pretty and very solid and rigid rather than super duper ventilated. So there it is, the more affordable version of the Razer Blade Pro 17-inch model with the GTX 1060 in here, your usual quad-core CPU, all that sort of thing. A 1080p display, which is actually a reasonable match in terms of gaming performance for this GPU inside of here. But you know what? I think for the people who are the pro apps folks who are looking at this and they want to do their Photoshop and their Adobe Premiere, they want a quality piece, something kind of Mac-like, but they want the speed and all that sort of thing, which the GTX 1060 is more than enough for Adobe CC family. It might be a little bummed that it's not a 4K display because those are the folks who really need it, not the gamers so much right now. It's all about compromises, so it's interesting the things that Razer decided to cut, including literally cutting into the battery and making it smaller, so there would be a hard drive bay, which is kind of an amenity you usually see in a gaming laptop and does make adding large amounts of storage more affordable. I leave this one up to you as to whether you think it's a good fit for you or not. Like I said, for gamers, there's different camps. There's me. I don't care what it looks like to a certain extent, as long as it has lots of horsepower, because I play AAA titles and I'm real serious about it, and I want the performance more than anything else. But there are those of you who really want the gorgeous build. You want pro apps kind of stuff. You want something maybe you could take to work and not have people giggle at you, and seeing the usual black and red or black and orange look. So, I mean, it has a lot of nice stuff to offer, and compared to other high-end laptops with this fit and finish, the price is fair. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.